If you're watching this video on your smartphone, your laptop, your TV, or you own an electric vehicle, there's a high chance that your money is enabling a mass genocide in Africa. How, you might ask? Well, there's a good chance some of the materials that is in your phone, used for your cars or your electronics, come from one of the most war-ravaged places on earth, Eastern Congo. This region sits on a treasure trove of minerals like coltan and cobalt, essential for powering modern technology. But behind the screens and sleek designs, there's a brutal reality, a multi-billion-dollar trade fueled by conflict, smuggling, and bloodshed. Major tech companies like Apple, Samsung, Tesla, Intel have all been linked to supply chains that run through Congo's war zones. Many have pledged to clean up the sourcing, but the global hunger for these minerals is relentless, and in the shadows of this demand, armed groups like M23 continue to rise, fueling violence that has displaced millions. And in a shocking turn of events, the Rwandan-backed M23 rebels have stormed into Goma, the biggest city in eastern Congo, and have taken control. Thousands of Congolese soldiers and civilians fled as the group, backed by thousands of Rwandan troops, swept through with brutal force. The death toll? Somewhere between 900 and 2,000 people. Real people, depending on who you ask. The streets are empty, homes abandoned, and yet another wave of war refugees pouring into makeshift camps. People who have already lost everything, now losing even more. And just like that, after weeks of fighting, M23 suddenly calls a unilateral ceasefire. But let's be real, this isn't the end. You and I know that. If anything, it's the beginning of something far bigger and far more dangerous. Rwanda has been accused of fueling rebel groups in eastern Congo for decades, and now with Goma in their hands, the stakes are higher than ever. So the real question is a full-blown war between Rwanda and Congo about to erupt? Before we can answer that, we need to go back in time to see the origin of one of the greatest conflicts in the African continent. Before Europeans stormed into Africa, drawing borders like kids scribbling on the map, the Great Lakes region was already home to powerful kingdoms, thriving trade routes, and well-structured societies. This wasn't some chaotic, uncivilized land waiting for salvation. Far from it. The people of this region, which is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, and parts of Tanzania, had their own political systems, military strategies, and economic networks long before colonizers set their foot on their soil. In the West, the Kingdom of Congo was a major player, controlling trade along the Atlantic coast. They dealt in ivory, textiles, and unfortunately enslaved people, though they operated under their own terms before the Portuguese gradually tightened their grip. Further inland, the Luba and the Lunda empires built sophisticated political systems. The Luba, for instance, had a government where power wasn't concentrated on one ruler's hands, but shared among chiefs, a kind of checks and balances before European democracies even figured it out. Then there was the Kingdom of Rwanda and Burundi. These societies had a highly centralized structure under the kings, the Mwamis. Unlike what colonial narratives later claimed, the Hutu and Tutsis and Twa weren't rigid, opposing ethnic groups. People moved between these categories depending on wealth and social standing. If a Hutu farmer became wealthy, he could rise to the status of a Tutsi. It wasn't about blood, it was about class. That all changed when colonialism came into the picture. King Leopold II of Belgium didn't just colonize the Congo, he turned it into his personal slave camp. From 1885 to 1908, the so-called Congo Free State wasn't a colony under Belgium. It was Leopold's private property, and he ran it like a brutal business. The goal? Extract as much rubber and ivory as possible, no matter the cost. And the cost was horrifying. Leopold's agents forced Congolese men into backbreaking labor, harvesting rubber under the threat of torture and death. Entire villages were wiped out for not meeting quotas. If workers resisted, soldiers would cut off their hands as proof of execution, a practice so widespread that photographs of piles of severed hands became infamous. By the time the world caught on to what was happening, an estimated 10 million Congolese had died from murder, forced labor, starvation, and disease. Leopold never set foot in the Congo, but he bled the land dry. And when the global outrage became too loud, Belgium took over in 1908, not to free the Congolese, but to keep control in a more respectable way and continue milking the resources aggressively. Now here's where things start linking back to the conflict today. The Belgians didn't just exploit Congolese land, they also imported thousands of Rwandan workers, mainly Tutsis, to work on plantations and in the mines. Many of them settled permanently in eastern Congo. That might not have been a big issue if Belgium didn't feel the idea that Tutsis were superior to Hutus and Congolese locals. The resentment started simmering. Then came 1959, the year Rwanda exploded. The Hutu majority overthrew the Tutsi monarchy in a violent revolution, forcing hundreds of thousands of Tutsis to flee. And where did they go? Straight to Congo. This was wave 2 of the Rwandan migration, and it turned eastern Congo into a ticking time bomb. The exiled Tutsis formed militant groups, determined to take back their homeland, while the new Hutu-led government in Rwanda saw them as a threat. Meanwhile, the local Congolese population grew even more resentful of the growing Rwandan presence. By the time the Rwandan genocide happened in 1994, eastern Congo was already a mess. And after the genocide, another wave of refugees flooded in, this time both victims and perpetrators. The lines between ally and enemy blurred completely. Rwanda's Tutsi-led government, fresh from victory in Kigali, were determined to hunt down the Hutu militias hiding in Congo. And that's where the wars truly began. Picture this, it's 1960 and the Congo had just won its independence from Belgium. Patrice Lumumba, the country's first prime minister, has this big vision. He wants true independence, not just in name, but in reality. He's calling for the Congolese to take control of their own resources, their own destiny. And guess who doesn't like that? The Belgians, the Americans, and pretty much everyone who had been profiting off of Congo's vast wealth. Within months, Lumumba is overthrown, arrested, and just weeks after, executed in one of the most brutal political assassinations of the Cold War era. The Western powers, working with local elites, make sure he's replaced by a man who will serve their interest, Mobutu Sese Seko. Now, Mobutu was no ordinary dictator. He was flamboyant, corrupt, and ran the country like his personal ATM. He renamed the country Zaire, forced everyone to wear African-styled clothing, even as his government stole billions, and ruled with an iron fist for 32 whole years. But more importantly, he completely mismanaged ethnic relations, especially in the east. Eastern Congo, even before Mobutu, had always been a melting pot of different ethnic groups: Congolese, Rwandans, Burundians, Ugandans. The problem was that Mobutu played ethnic groups against each other to maintain control. Sound familiar? He marginalized Tutsi populations who had lived in the region for years and decades, while allowing powerful warlords to form their own militias. He didn't really care about unity. He cared about staying in power. By the time the 1990s rolled out, Mobutu's grip on power was slipping. The economy was collapsing and his control over the army was weakening. Then came 1994, and with it, an event that would send the entire Great Lakes region into chaos. April 1994. Rwanda descends into one of the most horrific genocides of the 20th century. Over the course of 100 days, nearly 800,000 people, mostly Tutsis, are slaughtered by Hutu extremists. The world watches and does nothing. But as the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, led by Paul Kagame, fights back and takes control of Rwanda, something even bigger happens. a massive refugee crisis. Over 1 million Hutus, many of them civilians, but also the same militias that carried out the genocide, flee to Eastern Congo. They set up massive refugee camps, and instead of being disarmed, they start regrouping, plotting a return to Rwanda. Kagame, now in power in Rwanda, isn't about to let that happen. By 1996, Rwanda, along with Uganda, launches an invasion of Congo. They back a rebel group led by Laurent Desire Kabila, who is fighting to overthrow Mobutu. This war, known as the First Congo War, is swift. Within a year, Mobutu is gone, replaced by Kabila. But the seeds of the current crisis are already planted. By the mid-1990s, Mobutu's grip on power was all but gone. The country, still called Zaire at the time, was crumbling under the weight of corruption, economic collapse, and a military that was more interested in looting than fighting. What finally pushed him out wasn't a domestic uprising. It was an invasion led by Rwanda and Uganda. After the 1994 genocide, Rwanda was determined to crush the Hutu militias hiding in eastern Congo. But they didn't just stop at cross-border raids. Instead, they teamed up with Uganda to launch a full-scale war against Mobutu's regime, backing a little-known rebel leader named Laurent Desire Kabila. Kabila wasn't some revolutionary hero. He had been an old-school guerrilla fighter since the 1960s, but for most of his life he was more of a smuggler than a serious political player. That changed when Rwanda and Uganda handpicked him to lead a rebellion that quickly snowballed into the First Congo War. Mobutu, sick and dying of cancer, fled into exile in 1997. Just like that, a man who had ruled for 32 years was gone. With Mobutu out of the picture, Kabila took over and renamed the country the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. But there was a catch. His new government was practically a puppet of Rwanda and Uganda, which had helped put him in power. And that set the stage for an even bigger conflict. Kabila was never supposed to be a long-term leader. He was meant to be a placeholder, a man Rwanda and Uganda could control. But once he got comfortable in power, as they always do, he turned on his former allies. In 1998, he ordered Rwandan and Ugandan troops to leave the country, thinking he could stand on his own. Big mistake. Within months, Rwanda and Uganda were back in eastern Congo. This time not as allies, but as invaders. They backed a new rebel group, the Rally for Congolese Democracy, RCD, and tried to overthrow Kabila. But unlike the First Congo War, where the fight was basically against a dying Mobutu, this one got messy very fast. Angola, Zimbabwe, Chad, and Sudan all jumped in support of Kabila. Meanwhile, Rwanda and Uganda continued backing rebel forces. What started as a rebellion turned into the deadliest war in modern African history. A conflict so destructive that it's often called the African World War. The numbers are staggering. By the time the war officially ended in 2003, over 5 million people had died, mostly from hunger and diseases caused by the fighting. Kabila himself didn't make it to the end of the war. In 2001, he was assassinated, allegedly by one of his bodyguards. His son Joseph Kabila took over and negotiated a peace deal in 2003. The war officially ended, but the fighting in eastern Congo never truly or really stopped. Even after the Second Congo War ended, eastern Congo remained lawless. With so many armed groups running about, no one was truly in control. Rwanda, despite pulling its official troops out, still backed various militias in the region. The most powerful of these was the National Congress for the Defense of the People, CNDP, led by Laurent Nkunda, a former Congolese general with deep ties to Rwanda. Nkuda's CNDP was different from the other warlord-led militias. It was well organized, well armed, and had a clear agenda, defending the interests of the Congolese Tutsi population and pushing back against Hutu militias. The group caused havoc in eastern Congo throughout the 2000s, repeatedly clashing with the Congolese army. In 2009, a deal was struck. Nkunda was arrested by Rwanda, and the CNDP fighters were officially integrated into the Congolese army. But this solution was more like a ticking time bomb. Many of these fighters never truly abandoned their loyalties to Rwanda, and tensions kept simmering beneath the surface. The peace deal that had absorbed CNDP fighters into the Congolese army quickly fell apart. Many of them felt betrayed. They claimed the government had failed to honor the agreements made on March 23, 2009, which is where the group's name comes from, M23, March 23, 2009. So in 2012, they mutinied. The M23 rebels, many of them former CNDP fighters, turned against the government and launched a brutal campaign across eastern Congo. Within months, they did something that shook the world. They captured Goma, the capital of North Kivu province. Goma isn't just any city. It's the economic and political heart of eastern Congo. Watching it fall to a rebel group in broad daylight was humiliating for the Congolese government. Almost immediately, accusations started flying that Rwanda and Uganda were backing M23, giving them weapons, training, and intelligence support. The international response was swift. The United Nations, the United States, and the European Union all condemned Rwanda for allegedly supporting M23. Though Paul Kagame's government denied any involvement, under immense international pressure, Rwanda pulled back, and the Congolese army, with the help of a UN-backed intervention brigade, finally defeated M23 in 2013. With their backs against the wall, most of the M23 fighters fled into Uganda and Rwanda, where they either went into hiding or were supposedly disarmed. But here's the thing, M23 never really disappeared. They were just waiting for the right moment to strike again. And that moment has come. If history has taught us anything about conflict in Eastern Congo, it's that nothing ever truly ends. The warlords, the militias, the rivalries, they don't disappear. They just take breaks. And that's exactly what happened with M23. After their 2013 defeat, the fighters scattered. Some fled into Rwanda and Uganda, others melted into local communities, and a handful were supposedly reintegrated into the Congolese army. But the reintegration was a disaster. These former rebels weren't trusted. They weren't given proper ranks, and worst of all, the promises made to them in 2009 peace deal still hadn't been honored. By early 2022, M23 launched a full-scale comeback. The fighting quickly escalated, and within months they seized Bunagana, a strategic town on the border of Uganda. From there they pushed deeper into Rutshuru, tightening their grip on the North Kivu. By late 2023, they were once again knocking on the doors of Goma, the same city they had humiliated the government by capturing in 2012. And how did this happen? And more importantly, who is behind it? Officially, Rwanda denies everything. Paul Kagame's government insists they have no role in supporting M23, and any claims suggesting otherwise are nothing but Congolese propaganda. But on the ground, the story is different. The Congolese government UN reports and multiple independent investigations have pointed to Rwandan military support. We are talking weapons, intelligence, and even direct battlefield assistance. Kagame's reasons for backing M23 haven't changed since the group's first rebellion. Rwanda claims it's protecting itself from the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR, a Hutu militia in eastern Congo that has remnants of the genocidaires who had fled from the 1994 genocide. But they failed to mention geopolitical influence and economic interest. Controlling eastern Congo means controlling its massive mineral wealth. More on that in a moment. But Rwanda isn't the only player in this game. Uganda has been playing both sides of this conflict for years. While they were once Rwanda's closest ally, their relationship soured after the two countries backed rival rebel groups in the Second Congo War. Yet, Uganda still has economic interests in eastern Congo, and its military presence there is undeniable. In the late 2021, Uganda officially deployed troops into the North Kivu and Ituri as part of a joint operation with the Congolese army against the Allied Democratic Forces (ADF), an Islamist rebel group tied to ISIS. But while Uganda is supposedly fighting against the ADF, its actual stance on M23 is murky. Some reports suggest Ugandan officials have allowed M23 fighters to operate freely within their territory. Others claim Uganda is using M23 as a counterweight against growing Congolese-Rwandan cooperation. Whatever the case, the reality is that M23 has flourished in this chaotic environment. Their ability to seize and hold territory proves they are not just a rogue militia. They have serious backing, and that backing is tied to one thing above all: money. Let's get one thing straight. Eastern Congo isn't just any war zone. It's sitting on one of the richest deposits of minerals in the world. And where there are valuable resources, there are people willing to kill for them. The region is home to massive reserves of coltan, cobalt, gold, tin, tungsten, and diamonds. M23 isn't just fighting for political control. It's fighting for the economy of Eastern Congo. And Rwanda, more like any other country, has been accused of profiting from this chaos. Despite having almost no coltan reserves of its own, Rwanda has become one of the world's leading exporters of the mineral. How? By smuggling it from Congo. For years, reports have shown that Rwandan companies backed by the government are deeply involved in illegal mineral trade. M23 and other rebel groups mine the minerals. Smugglers transport them across the border, and Rwandan firms refine and sell them to multinational corporations. This isn't speculation. It's been documented by the United Nations, human rights organizations, and investigative journalists. Rwanda has built an entire industry off of Congolese minerals, and companies in the US, Europe, Asia are buying these conflict-tainted resources without asking too many questions. So where does this leave the DRC? Right now, the Congolese government is scrambling to contain M23's offensive, despite efforts from the UN peacemakers, MONUSCO, the Eastern African Community Regional Force, and bilateral agreements with other African nations. M23 continues to gain ground. The government has also started shifting alliances, turning to Angola, Burundi, and even Russia for military support. But the deeper issue remains unresolved. As long as Eastern Congo's minerals are worth billions of dollars, there will always be powerful players, whether they are rebels, foreign governments, or multinational corporations who have no interest in peace. So the big question isn't just how to stop M23, but how to break the cycle of warlords, smuggling, and foreign exploitation that has plagued Eastern Congo for decades. And that's the battle Congo still hasn't won. The war in the Congo isn't just about M23. It's not just about the Congolese government. This is a regional chess game with powerful players moving their pieces, some in the shadows, some in broad daylight. And at the center of it all, the man who has shaped the conflict more than anyone else in the last 2 decades, Paul Kagame. Paul Kagame doesn't just see himself as another African leader. He sees himself as a strategic genius, a war-hardened survivor, and a man who refuses to bow to anyone. And in many ways, he has played his cards brilliantly. Ever since his Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, seized power in 1994, Kagame has positioned himself as a Western darling, praised for transforming Rwanda into a tech-driven economy. The country is clean, orderly, and rapidly modernizing. Google, Microsoft, and Volkswagen are setting up operations. Kagame is even talking about turning Rwanda into Africa's Silicon Valley. The tension between Kagame's carefully curated international image and his brutal realpolitik in the DRC is now more obvious than ever. Can Rwanda be Africa's next tech powerhouse while fueling one of the deadliest conflicts of the 21st century? Kagame seems to think so, but not everyone is willing to let him get away with it anymore. So what is the rest of the African community doing about this? Enter Kenya, the regional economic powerhouse that doesn't want to get its hands too dirty but still wants a seat at the table. When the latest round of conflict broke out, Kenya stepped in as a diplomatic broker. Former President Uhuru Kenyatta led negotiations, pushing for a ceasefire and trying to mediate between Kagame and Congolese President Felix Tshisekedi. But diplomacy is only half the story. Kenya has major economic interests in the DRC. Kenyan banks, businesses, and transport networks are expanding into Congolese markets. Stability means more money, and instability threatens their profits. South Africa has always played the role of regional stabilizer, sending peacekeeping troops, hosting negotiations, and trying to prevent total collapse in the Great Lakes region. But recently, Kagame has made direct threats against South Africa forces, warning them to stay out of the DRC conflict. This has put President Cyril Ramaphosa in a tough spot. For now, Pretoria is taking a cautious approach, but if Kagame's aggression crosses the line, South Africa may be forced to flex its military and economic muscle. But there's the United Nations, specifically MONUSCO, the UN's peacekeeping mission in the DRC. After decades of deployment and billions of dollars spent, MONUSCO has failed to prevent the rise of M23 or stop the violence. Congolese civilians are furious of the UN, accusing them of doing nothing while rebel groups seize cities and massacre people. Protests against the UN have turned violent, with MONUSCO troops being chased out of villages. Meanwhile, Western nations talk tough but do little. France and the EU have been increasing pressure on Rwanda to stop supporting M23, but their influence is limited. The US and the UK, both long-time allies of Kagame, don't want to completely turn against him. Sanctions and threats have been thrown around, but real consequences, not so much. Kagame knows this, and as long as the West keeps hesitating, he'll keep playing his game. Right now, Congo is surrounded by predators, and Congo itself still fighting to survive. The pieces are moving, the players are making their moves, but the question remains, will the DRC finally take back control of its own future? Or will it remain a battleground in a war fueled by greed, power, and betrayal? Imagine this, 6.9 million people, entire villages, towns, forced to flee their homes, families leaving behind everything they own, running from gunfire, massacres, and the horror that comes with every new rebel offensive. That's the humanitarian crisis unfolding in the DRC right now. The roads leading away from Goma, Bunagana, and the Rutshuru are filled with thousands of people clutching whatever they could carry. Children strapped to backs, plastic bags of clothes, jerrycans of water. They walk for days, weeks even, only to find overcrowded displacement camps where food is scarce and medical aid is minimal and hope is a luxury. And the stories from these camps, beyond horrifying. And yet, despite all this suffering, where is the global outrage? When war broke out in Ukraine, the world mobilized within weeks. Media coverage, massive aid packages, sanctions, and global protest. But in Congo, crickets. When Gaza's sufferings made headlines, there were marches in every major West African city. When the Congolese civilians are gunned down in church or when refugee camps are shelled, the world looks away. This is a bitter reality of Congo's war, a humanitarian catastrophe that exists in silence, but not everyone is staying silent. A new generation of Congolese youth is refusing to let their country's suffering go unnoticed. Armed with smartphones, social media, and a fearless determination, young activists in Goma, Kinshasa, and even in the diaspora are taking to the streets, demanding an end to Rwanda's interference and calling out their own government's failures. The protests have a raw, unfiltered energy, youth-led, unafraid, and unwilling to be ignored. Some draw parallels to Nigeria's EndSARS movement, where young Nigerians use social media to amplify their voices against police brutality. But in the DRC, the stakes are even higher, and the message is clear. The youth are tired of war, tired of corruption, tired of waiting for peace that never comes. But here's the real tragedy. If peace were restored, the DRC could be one of Africa's richest nations. With its massive reserves of cobalt, coltan, and the gold, the country could dominate the global mineral market. With stability, its agricultural sector could feed millions. With proper governance, the Congolese people could finally benefit from their own wealth. But peace remains elusive, and as long as conflict continues, so does the cycle of poverty, chaos, and lost opportunity. But what does real estate got to do with all of this? We are, of course, in fact, a real estate channel. At first glance, you might think real estate has nothing to do with the DRC-Rwanda conflict. But let's take a step back, and you see the connection is bigger than most people realize. First, conflict leads to displacement, and when people flee their homes, whether because of violence, insecurity, or economic hardship, entire regions become unstable. Property values drop, abandoned lands become battlegrounds, and real estate investment dries up. In places like the eastern DRC, where armed groups fight over land rich in minerals, control of territory isn't just about natural resources. It's also about who owns the land and who gets pushed out. Then there's the issue of urban migration. As people escape conflict zones, cities in both the DRC and neighboring Rwanda experience sudden population surges. This strains housing markets, driving up rental prices, creating informal settlements, and sometimes even leading to land disputes in urban areas. Kigali, for example, has seen significant urban expansion in recent years, partly fueled by economic migration from the DRC. And let's not forget international players. Foreign investors, often hesitant to pour money into conflict-ridden regions, tend to focus on safer real estate markets. But ironically, some of the very corporations benefiting from the DRC's mineral wealth also invest in high-end real estate projects somewhere else, sometimes in Rwanda, which has positioned itself as a stable, investment-friendly alternative. What a surprise. So whether it's through displacement, urban growth, or foreign investment patterns, real estate isn't just a side story in the DRC-Rwanda conflict. It's part of the bigger picture. So what happens next? Is there a way out of this nightmare? Or we are simply watching the prelude to an even bloodier chapter? Right now, there have been peace talks, summits, ceasefires, so many attempts to stop the bloodshed. At this point, many Congolese believe peace talks are just delays before the next war. So if diplomacy won't stop the fighting, what will? One thing is clear though, Congo cannot fight this battle alone. There are growing calls for other African nations to step up, not just governments, but the people. Some activists argue that stronger governance in the DRC itself is the key because weak leadership allows rebel groups to thrive. Others point to the African nation, AU, which has issued countless statements but done little beyond that. Shouldn't the AU be doing more than just talking? If African nations truly believe in Pan-Africanism, then it's time to act. Because if Congo's war continues unchecked, it won't just be the DRC that suffers. The entire region will burn. The next few months will determine everything. Will Congo finally reclaim its destiny? Or will it remain a land of broken dreams, where peace is always promised but never delivered? Only time will tell. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been called many things: the heart of Africa, a land of untold riches, a battleground for warlords, a forgotten tragedy. But above all, it remains a story unfinished. The future of the DRC will not be determined solely by politicians in Kinshasa, warlords in the forest, or presidents in Kigali and Kampala. It will be shaped by the resilience of its people, by the millions who refuse to be silenced, by the youth who take to the streets demanding justice, and by a new generation unwilling to accept war as their destiny. Because here's the truth, no country can ever truly prosper when its people are constantly forced to fight. The battles in Eastern Congo are not just about land, power, or even minerals. They're about the soul of Africa itself. If there's one thing history has proven, is that wars thrive in the shadows. The less the world knows, the easier it is for armed groups to exploit, for governments to suppress, for foreign powers to meddle. But this is not the era of silence. The more we talk about Congo, the harder it becomes to ignore. The louder the cries for peace, the more impossible it is for war to continue unchecked. And yet awareness isn't enough. The road to peace isn't just about stopping gunfire. It's about rebuilding trust, fixing broken institutions, ensuring that another generation doesn't grow up knowing only war. Because without justice, there is no peace. Without accountability, war will return. Without economic development, there will always be reasons to fight. And Africa cannot afford another century of war. Too many times, African nations have let ethnic divisions, greed, and foreign interests tear them apart. Too many times, leaders have exploited historical grievances and economic ambition to do same. And yet, here we are again, with nations at the edge of war, with brothers fighting brothers, with Africa repeating the same mistakes. It's time to break the cycle, I think. No mineral, land, or political gain is worth the destruction of entire generations. No war built on greed and hate has ever ended in true victory. Africa is at a turning point. Will we continue to tear ourselves apart? Or will we finally learn from history and build a future where war is no longer our legacy? The choice is truly yours. Thank you so much for watching. What are your thoughts on the conflict? Leave a reply in the comment section below. This is the Ownahome TV show, and here at Ownahome, we believe that owning a home, owning a property should not make you lose sleep. So we are committed to giving you the very best property recommendations and insider real estate gist. Check out the other videos in this series and in the channel. See you at the very next video. Bye-bye.